Hi everyone. Today I am going to be doing some playing around with colors. I've got this bee mini palette logo in front of me, all sketched out. And I was just going to start painting with all these rainbow assortment of colors for it. Mostly what I'm doing here is working wet and wet because I'm letting the color bleed out a little bit and flow within each of these cells. That kind of gives it a nice variation of tone, and also because many of my pigments are Daniel Smith granulating or separating pigments, they also result in some interesting textures when I paint wet and wet like this. I'm not being terribly careful with the edges of these cells because in fact I have a plan in mind to stick one of my laser cut dealy-doos over this at the end. And so in order to not have any little white edges showing through, I'm actually having to paint a little bit past my pencil lines. So it lets me be a little bit messier with my borders than I would normally be if I was painting this as just a normal painting to be framed up in a regular old frame. I'm switching back and forth a lot between using a size 4 brush and a size 0 brush round. The size 4 for the initial water and wet, and then this little nice tiny pointed size 0 one to get the edges a little bit cleaner. You know, right after I just told you that I wasn't being terribly careful with edges, here you see me going over all of those carefully. Again, switching to that larger brush. That's what I generally do when I'm working wet and wet. You want to have a larger brush that can hold water because the smaller brushes aren't going to be able to hold as much liquid in those bristles, or pigment for that matter. So if you really want to get some good flow of pigment and liquid going, you want to have a brush that can hold some more. And for this reason also I prefer to use sable brushes because generally they're much better at holding the liquid within the bristles and without just releasing it all entirely once you set your brush to the page. The one you see me using at this moment, well, just there before, was a Kolinsky Sable Winsor & Newton Series 7. And this little pointed one is actually a synthetic. It is not sable. And I've started liking these. They are Royal and Langnickel Zen brushes. They are synthetic. And most of the time I find with synthetic brushes that the hairs get really worn out quickly. They don't last the way sable ones do. But these guys hold up pretty well. I mean, they definitely don't last as long as sable brushes, but for the cost of them, they do pretty well. I think each of the little size 0 liners are about $2, $2 or $3 or so, which is incredibly cheap for paintbrushes of any quality. Now I'm going in with a little bit more. This is a secondary layer glaze, wet and wet, and I wanted some of the adjoining cells to look like they were bleeding color one into the other, which is why I wet a secondary layer over that purple, and I did some wet and wet with the blue on the edges and let that just sort of flow over into the side. And same with all the other cells in this. You can see how the colors meld one into the other. And that's all mostly done wet and wet, letting that happen on the page rather than mixing in my palette beforehand. So up until this point, you could see that my mixer palette was clean because I was just letting colors flow and move and mix together on the page as I was going. But now that I'm moving into the secondary color areas here, I'm pre-mixing a little bit in my mixer before applying it to the page because I want to have these as the solid colors, these solid in-between mixed tone colors. And here we go with some speed up. No, I haven't suddenly gained Superman powers in my painting speed skill. This is now, I think, about 4 times speed up time lapse, just so that you could see me going through with all the rest of the colors and painting the rest of this piece. Because mostly the technique that I'm applying is the same that I described for early on, but it's still kind of fun to just watch the colors happen as this goes. Those blues are some of my favorites. I've always loved the cobalt blues, and there's this electric color